From ancient manuscripts that literally even the CIA can't decipher, to ancient pipes that are 150,000 years old despite humans only being around 12,000 years, to giant megastructures that to this day scientists cannot explain. What if our ancestors left us a lot of hints to tell us we're not the first human civilization? Welcome to Insomnia Rants, where we cover impossible topics. Let's talk ancient mysteries.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
You may remember this from school, but have you ever wondered why that language training app is called Rosetta Stone? It's because up until 1799, we could not translate Egyptian hieroglyphs. Literally, for centuries and centuries and centuries, humans stumbled around these pyramids unable to understand what they were even saying. We discovered a cute little tablet in 1799 called the Rosetta Stone. It was real. It contained the same message. It was a decree essentially saying maintain temples, respect priests, XYZ, but it was translated into three languages. First was Greek, which we understood. Second was Demotic, not demonic, Demotic, which is just layman's terms Egyptian. And then you had hieroglyph, which is what we didn't understand. From this Rosetta Stone, we were able to finally get a grasp on what these hieroglyphs meant. Again, though, for centuries, we literally had no idea. And in 2025, many of these mysteries still exist around the world and are yet to be understood. Let's start with the obvious ones. We're going to definitely make a separate video covering these at some point, but the pyramids of Giza. For the sake of this video, all you need to know is this is a giant unexplained ancient structure, specifically the Great Pyramid of Khufu on the plains of Giza. They cannot answer how these things were built. Did we use copper tools? Well, they would have broken. Did we use ropes? They're not likely. Did we use boats to transport all these stones? Where did we even quarry all the stones to build the pyramid? How did we transport them? We don't have conclusive answers on these things. We got speculation, but that's all it is. And the modern science community likes to pretend because we have speculation, there's no possibility of unexplained possibilities, and that makes no sense. Since we don't know how they're built, it's an open world of conversation about how these things got constructed. People point to aliens and all these crazy things, but here are just some hard truth facts that undeniably confirm the pyramid, specifically the Great Pyramid of Giza, is completely unlike anything humans have ever constructed in modern time. Number one, the Great Pyramid of Giza is within 0.05 degrees margin of error of true north, not north, true north. You would need GPS technology to be able to see this. How did Egyptians know how to calculate it so precisely only 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago? There are numerous chambers inside the Pyramid of Giza that we don't understand. Unlike every other pyramid, we usually say these pyramids are burial chambers, the Great Pyramid of Giza has no burial inscription. And the pyramid's called the Pyramid of Khufu. There was only one explorer to ever discover anything with Khufu's name on it, and it's speculated that he was just in competition with another explorer who was about to discover something big. In other words, he lied. If you hum at a certain frequency inside the pyramid, it reverberates throughout the whole chamber.
And I've spent 11 nights in the Great Pyramid now. At that time, it was only my second time. And while my friend was laying in the sarcophagus, I would lean over into the sarcophagus and hum at the resonance of the sarcophagus. The chamber has its own resonance frequency, and it most definitely will resonate very loudly. So it'll start to go whoa, 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 like it's an engine turning on.
We are still discovering underground tunnels beneath these pyramids, huge shafts. I think within the last month or two, this hit the mainstream media news that there are huge radar technology indicating a city underneath the pyramids. Fun fact, in ancient Greek, pyramid means energy vessel, so why is this thing called an energy vessel, yet it's just a stone tomb? Another fun fact, most people know about the Sphinx that sits out in front of these pyramids. The Sphinx has seashells and water erosion in it. This would mean that the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids of Giza are millions of years old. What if the Egyptians just discovered these giant pyramids and just started setting up shop and creating their culture and their identity around these natural phenomena they literally just stumbled across. In the same region, there's this artifact called the Disk of Sabu. This thing is over 5,000 years old, and we have no idea what the heck this thing was used for. Supposedly, it has a lot of applications with water. It's not a good propeller. People who have 3D printed it say it literally has weird interactions with water, suggesting that perhaps the pharaohs and their sons had control to the river flowing into the pyramid. Further in Egypt, fun fact of the day, did you know that there are ancient texts that describe every single king that ruled in Egypt, and there is a distinct point in history where they described not pharaoh mortal kings but god kings, and then at some point they started writing all their pharaohs down as mortal kings. In other words, there were god kings ruling Egypt at some point, and then us petty mortal humans started taking over. This sounds far-fetched until you realize during the same time period, 2000 to 5000 BC, China on the other side of the world describes the exact same thing. In 3 Sovereigns and 5 Emperors, they describe god kings, demigods, literally guiding humanity and getting them kind of off the bumper rails so they can start doing their own civilization. What if I were to tell you there's a third source called the Sumerian king list that literally lists kings that used to rule for tens of thousands of years, and then a flood happened. After this flood, kings started only ruling for a mere 1,000 to 10,000 years, and then eventually through time, kings only started ruling for 100 to 200 years, and that's that. It's almost like we got watered down, flood pun intended. How about this? The Great Flood mentioned in the Sumerian king list is also listed in almost every single major religion around the world. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Sumerian, Akkadian, Assyrian, Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Chinese mythology, Native American tribes, Mesoamerica, South America, Polynesian, Australian, African traditions, and all these other religions all mention a great flood that wiped out most of human civilization. This is not a standalone phenomena that is occurring within these isolated religions. They all reference a great flood that wiped us out, and many of them list the fact that many of the animals were saved. Noah's Ark is the classic one where, Noah, if you guys don't know the story, essentially Noah was instructed by God, a great flood was coming. He got 2 of every type of animal, a male and a female, built a giant boat, floated on top of the waters, came back, and human civilization started over. There are tons of references to the fact that most of our animals actually got saved at some point by an ark or something. And frankly, it was because humans were greedy. It had nothing to do with whether or not nature was trying to wipe us out. It was deliberate. Humans had gotten greedy and we needed to start civilization over. And speaking of that Sumerian king list that we just mentioned, I don't know about you guys, but the longer that people seem to stay in power, the more out of touch and corrupt they get. I think maybe if there is a higher power that was resetting the world, maybe he wanted to shorten our lifespans because, frankly, a king ruling for 10,000 years, I can only imagine how corrupt they would get after merely 100, much less thousands of years. And if there was a great flood, it would help explain one of the biggest cartography phenomena of the modern century. If you guys haven't heard of the Piri Reis Map, this thing is really, really interesting. It was created in 1513, supposedly using information gathered from ancient civilizations, specifically ancient Egyptian knowledge. It features Antarctica with absolutely no ice. It was almost perfectly mapped out. Nobody even discovered Antarctica until like the 1800s. Why was Antarctica on this map featured with no ice, almost perfectly mapped out, with animals? Who mapped this out? Even in 2025, have no ideas. And this thing almost deserves a separate video on its own because of all the questions it raises. There's actually been a lot of videos recently on this one, but the Voynich Manuscript was written around the same period. It was written between 1404 and 1438 based off the best estimations. Don't worry, if you can't read this, you're not alone, because nobody else on planet Earth at any point in history has been able to decipher this thing. It does not match any written language we've seen, and if we scroll through this thing, you'll notice there's a lot of illustrations. This would have taken a lot of work to reproduce. I don't really know how I would go about faking a fake language with illustrations. Of course, you could just jot down a bunch of random characters, But the issue is there's enough patterns that it looks like an actual language. We just don't know how to read this thing. The CIA has tried, the NSA has tried, to my understanding, has tried to decipher this thing, but they cannot crack it. It depicts a bunch of, depictions of plants, life. It seems to be the building blocks of how life grows until page 114. If you notice, it's plants, 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 and then what it looks like the circle of life. There's babies depicted here. If we keep scrolling, it goes back to plants, but then there's charts of the astronomy, stars. We really can't understand what the heck this book is trying to tell us. Based off simple illustrations, it appears that plants, life, even the cosmos, something that is engineered, fabricated, it can be understood and explained just in a language we don't understand. Speaking of languages we can't read, did you know back in Crete, have you ever heard of the Minotaur and the king that turned things to gold? Great, that was on Crete back in the ancient Greek mythology. Did you know in 1850 to 1450 BCE, we know Linear B, but there's a second strand of language called Linear A that we can't understand. If a language is only 3,000 years old and we can't understand it, what about languages that are tens of thousands of years ago that may have survived that we also can't understand? It is crazy to think almost the human language or human civilization has amnesia. We forget things so quickly, and frankly, with 100-year lifespans, it's not a surprise. Every 100 years, an entirely different generation of humans are born, and unless that information is transferred, we forget. I think Linear A, if you Google this and do your own research, you'll find this is probably a consequence of amnesia. And here's the crazy part. Linear A is not alone. What if I were to tell you there's a thing called the Indus Script? Again, you can just Google or YouTube this, come to your own conclusion. But the Indus Script, even in 2025, there are 5,000 inscriptions that literally have not been translated or deciphered. Nobody can understand these things. 5,000. I mean, just imagine it. What if you went to your diary right now? This is a whole freaking language that at some point, some human somewhere tried to write down and explain to us what's going on, and we can't understand it. And it is crazy that merely a few thousand years later, we've lost all translations and we don't know how to decipher these things. There's the Proto-Elamite Script, and it's supposedly been deciphered. And ancient scholars or modern scholars have deciphered a mysterious ancient script. This thing was unsolved for years and years and years, and just like the Egyptian hieroglyphs, through time we're going to eventually figure these things out. This is another written language that we have tons and tons of evidence for, but we just didn't understand until supposedly 2022. This thing again is called the Proto-Elamite Script, and you can research this topic for yourself. What about this Isthmian Script? That is really hard. Isthmian Script. Point is, this thing also hasn't been deciphered. Yup. There's another book called the Liber Linteus. You can go Google this for yourself. That has also been untranslated. This is another language that is less than 2,000 years ago that we've completely forgotten, I guess. You remember how we mentioned Crete earlier, the Minotaur and all that? Here's another artifact from Crete that literally we cannot translate. The Phaistos Disk has been puzzling a lot of historian archaeologists for years because what the heck does it say? Have you heard of this thing before this video? A lot of you guys might have, but many of you probably haven't. This goes to show how humans really only care what's going on in their day-to-day modern life, and things like this just simply get forgotten to time. And here's the fun part. Not only can we not understand actual written text, but located in Peru, there's these things called the Nazca Lines, and they are extremely interesting when you zoom out from an aerial shot because these are massive pieces of artwork carved into the land. Some stretch up to 1,200 feet. When you use a drone just like this video is showcasing and you truly get that nice aerial shot, these things are made with such geometric precision, it begs the question, number one, how did they make these so long ago to such precision? Number two, why did they select these specific characters and animals? There's a hummingbird, there's a monkey, what appears to be a killer whale, and the ones on the mountaintops are the mountain insides here are simply breathtaking when you think, again, that these were made thousands of years ago and supposedly without the assistance of aerial technology or top-down technology. If you Google or YouTube these, at some point we may end up making a separate video on it because there's a lot of random and weird coincidences with artifacts and books and lore and culture that point to the general direction of where these things were made. They've puzzled historians and archaeologists for years and probably will continue to do so. Also located in Peru is what people call Candelabra of Paracas. This thing, as many people might imagine, has been called a candelabra, and this thing is absolutely huge, and it's carved into the side of a mountain 180 meters tall. It completely defies expectation of what most ancient civilizations would be able to create. Really makes you want to go build a sandcastle, And if it looks like those artworks were carved by giants, don't worry, because there are plenty of theories floating around that once upon a time, thousands of years ago, maybe humans were giants. What you're looking at here is called the Plain of Jars, and it is truly breathtaking when you zoom out and realize not only how big these things are. I mean, we've been speculating these have been used for burial rites. We're not really sure, but these things are absolutely everywhere. They stretch as far as the eye can see, and obviously at our current heights, our little 6-foot hollow heights, we have no need to store anything this large. But maybe back in the day they were used for a different purpose. It's really hard to analyze why old civilizations would have used technology that they did, because frankly they were living in such a different time period. All I know is years later these things are massive, and it's really just hard to fathom not only how they were made, but how were they even transported, right? Because if they're storing something, you would think they would be movable or, able to go from location A to location B, but maybe these were just permanent shelters, but what was on the inside of them, we don't really know. Really just captures the imagination. Of course, you've got the classic Easter Island. These things, of course, I really like this image because it gives you some humans for perspective, but Easter Island has been puzzling people for years and years and years, and we'll most certainly make a different video on this at some point. There's just these massive stone structures that are really, really hard to imagine how they would have been constructed, moved, transported. Very similar to the pyramids, we have a lot of speculation, but no concrete answers on how these things were constructed or moved. Oh, and don't worry, there's another language called Rongorongo or whatever that we also remains undeciphered in 2025. Add this to the list of languages and scripts and whatnot that is undeciphered. Stonehenge is a classic. This is a 3D replica of what it probably would have been. In 2025, there's a lot of destroyed parts to it, but these things are massive. How was this thing constructed? Stonehenge also deserves a separate video on of its own, just because, again, this thing raises a ton of questions. What was it used for? Why is it so perfectly aligned with the stars? There's a lot of astronomy going on with Stonehenge as well. Also seems to have survived for a very, very, very long time. Located off Costa Rica, there's also these giant sphere stone balls. I mean, these things are massive. I don't know what these things were used for. Really, really inspiring to think that back in the day, they were able to make these things to such precision. There were giants at one point in history. Maybe they had a purpose for them we just don't know about. Been speculated. I honestly need to do more research on this topic. I don't have a good answer for you guys yet, but there's a lot of fuzzy articles out there saying that giant bones have been discovered. Now, a lot of these things are hoaxes, which is why I need to go do more research on them. But supposedly all throughout Mexico and whatnot, they've discovered human bones throughout time that are 7 feet, 8 feet large. It would also explain why in the Bible, fun fact, the Bible mentions a time when giants used to rule the world. This would also line up with that Sumerian king list we talked about earlier, where kings were ruling for thousands of years. Maybe there were giants ruling the earth at some point before the Great Flood or something happened. And then they got wiped out, but only very, very few remnants of their civilization and time survived. And what we see today are just mere fractions of what used to be. And if you do want to have some fun and buy into that giant theory, that would also help answer how all these pyramids were constructed. We started talking about pyramids at the front half of the video, but what I didn't mention is that Egypt is not the only country with pyramids in them. There are confirmed intangible pyramids in Sudan, Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, El Salvador, Peru, Bolivia, Indonesia, China, Greece, and Spain. That is a lot of pyramids and a lot of bizarre worldwide coincidences to see these things everywhere. Of course, there's also speculative pyramids that are covered up or not even revealed to the public by their respective governments in America, France, Italy, Bosnia, Japan, Kazakhstan, Australia, and even Antarctica. And if you want a fun little topic, we'll definitely make a different video on this at some point, but there's supposedly a dark pyramid underneath Alaska in America that the CIA has covered up. There's a lot of high-ranking government officials that have called or whistleblown and said that there's a huge dark pyramid buried miles underneath the ice up there. There's even been found a runway. It's a whole story for another time. Definitely go research it if you just want a fun little rabbit hole to jump down. And although this thing is not a pyramid, Sacsayhuaman, I have no idea how to pronounce that, please. I know I just butchered it. But these also have historians and archaeologists very puzzled. What you're looking at is a top-down view, so you can see just how precise this thing is. But it is ancient, and the thing that really captures the imagination is just how big the stones are. The stones weigh thousands of tons and they're perfectly carved in. It looks like a giant fort, but if you look at the actual paths for normal everyday humans, this wall is way too big for humans to have actually had a use for. And it's really inspiring, again, to think that at some point somewhere, a civilization hundreds, thousands of years old was able to do this. It almost sounds unrealistic. It feels like an ancient relic or an ancient fort that was left over from a time long forgotten. It's truly beautiful looking at just how ornately it's built, and they give each of their rocks, like, it doesn't feel, you know, block here, block there. It's very beautiful in the way that each rock is allowed to express itself. I don't know. It's very, very interesting. I'll say that much. And as a final mysterious location that scientists still to this day can't really explain are the Mount Biagong pipe. These weren't discovered until the 90s, and they look very, very bizarre. Honestly, there are a lot of good explanations as to how these things were formed. What they theorize is that these were actually plant roots or tree roots, and then through time sediment built around the tree roots. The tree roots eventually died because they're made of organic matter, and then what didn't get removed was the sediments that had formed around these roots, which had formed pipes through time. Now, the only issue with that theory is there is 8% of these pipes are made of a mysterious metal that we literally had no idea what they were in 2001. I don't know if it ever got revealed to the public what they were made of, but the Mount Biagong pipes certainly strike the imagination when you look at them. This picture makes it look almost like a fossilized palm tree, so you can see where people can easily believe or see or understand these things to just be fossilized tree roots. But other images also just show a level of detail that really sparks the imagination. And the fascinating part, these things date all the way back to 150,000 years ago. If these are organic formations, great, they're only 150,000 years ago, and that would make sense. But what if they are made by humans and they're not organic? If these are artificial constructs, it would completely throw out the modern model of history. It would prove that there was an ancient civilization and that these things served a purpose somewhere for something we don't understand. That's all I've got for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm really excited for my next few videos because I've got an interesting format that I want to try on YouTube to tell some of the stories. We've been going through a couple videos where we've been mainly talking, but I really want to start deep diving topics, kind of like we did with the Mars video, and I've got a really interesting idea on storytelling. It may take me a couple weeks to a month to get it out, but I'm excited to put it together for you guys, so stay tuned on that. Thank you again. Make sure to subscribe. We're making a new channel around here, and this is a human, of course, so support humans, not AI, right? See you in the next one. Bye.